Can anyone stop the idea whose time has come? Ask ChatGPT and you will get the answer in negative. Until a few months ago, artificial intelligence was confined to science fiction movies, and most of us thought that it would not be a reality for another 30 to 40 years. But the swift rise in adoption of generative artificial intelligence has caught everyone off the guard. The quick adoption has also given rise to the fear of the unknown, and talks of putting guardrails are on. India, the world's most populous country, has a lot to gain or lose too. All depends on how the country adopts AI. While speaking at an event organized by a business daily, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently said that India should use its presidency of G20 to call for greater international conversation on regulating AI. Altman said that India could take the lead in conversations around global regulation for AI. Coincidentally, within the next 24 hours, India's apex non-governmental tech-focused industry body, Nasscom, released its first normative guidelines that may act as common standards and protocols for researchers, developers, and users of AI technologies. Some of the key recommendations include having internal oversight for the life cycle of AI solutions, as well as public disclosure of all technical and non-proprietary information about the development process, data, and algorithm sources. Besides these recommendations, the Nasscom guidelines have also defined potential harms associated with research and the use of generative AI. The list includes the proliferation of misinformation and hateful content, infringement of intellectual property, and academic malpractices. The industry body also suggested that all stakeholders create technical means to furnish explanations for outputs generated by AI, especially in high-stake processes such as consumer credit lending. The guidelines also stressed that any AI-related data collection and processing should also strictly adhere to India's data protection and IP rules. Besides laying down a blueprint for the responsible development and deployment of AI technologies, the guidelines also advise that developers should establish grievance redressal mechanisms to deal with mishaps caused by such processes. Moreover, the guidelines identify as their prime goal a building of stakeholder consensus on core normative obligations. The draft guidelines have been framed after consultations with the technology industry, a multidisciplinary group of AI experts, researchers, and practitioners with representation from academia and civil society, Nasscom said. So, what might be the larger impact of the Nasscom guidelines on India's developing AI ecosystem?
What Nasscom has put out is more like a guideline, but they have done a terrific job of putting the stake in the ground. Having said that, but it's not easy to put those regulations in the ground. So how do we make regulations enforceable and reasonable for that matter, and which does not kill innovation in the generative AI tree? The unfortunate part is that this is not a mature technology as yet, and therefore classically you should not be bringing in regulations on a sector which is yet not mature. But on the other hand, it's maturing extremely fast. It's going at an exponential pace in terms of maturity, and therefore we can't do without putting in a regulation.
The industry would have to very closely follow the developments in the technology itself and cooperate with both organizations like Nasscom and also in terms of the national regulatory authority or the government. I think the government itself, through Niti Aayog, is already considering some sort of a thought leadership paper on this, and maybe a regulatory mechanism on the long run, whether it's in the form of a Digital India Act or some other legislation. So I'm sure, once that comes into place, it will be easier to enforce and implement some of the regulations around AI guidelines.
And what might be some of the challenges that AI researchers and practitioners might face in adhering to these guidelines.
If you look at the competitors in, let's say, US, because they were the first ones off the block, they had access to massive amount of data and freely innovated on what they did. So if we bring in regulation too early, then we'll take away a lot of the bandwidth of the startups just looking behind their backs, and there is no possible enforcement that we can have, or at least one that we can think of that we can have right now. So 3 months, 6 months down the line, we will see that the Americans and possibly the Chinese will be way ahead, while we have bound ourselves up in terms of all kinds of regulations and international commitments and so on and so forth, while also starting off with the initial handicap of not having the same amount of data that our American counterparts will be having. And that's something that's really worries me.
Obviously, because of the steep learning curve for generative AI, the guidelines would need to be continuously updated. And this is while on one hand it provides the flexibility for quickly evolving with the technology, but on the other hand, it also throws up challenges in terms of implementation, because if the guidelines are too broad and they are they're not specific, then implementation becomes a bit difficult.
Experts therefore have hailed Nasscom for taking the first step towards a regulatory framework on the nascent but rapidly evolving field of generative AI. However, they also point out that these guidelines are not enough, and a more detailed conversation involving government regulatory bodies will be necessary to enforce a smooth implementation, especially in a market like India, where the adoption of AI has been quite swift.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.
He's moving from employee to employer. Business Standard.